Welcome back. We are still talking about sustainable insurance, so let's get started. We've now seen the risks insurers face: physical, transition, and liability, and the tools they use to share them. It's time to look at the rules of the game. This is Part E: Regulation and Frameworks. Insurers don't operate in a vacuum. They sit inside a thickening web of European regulation and global standards, all pushing sustainability deeper into the business. It helps to keep two tracks separate as we go. On one track is hard, mandatory regulation, European Union law and prudential rules that insurers must obey. On the other track is voluntary, industry-led commitment, the pledges and principles insurers sign up to of their own accord. As we'll see, the mandatory track keeps getting stronger, while the voluntary track has just suffered a very public setback. That contrast is the real story of this video. Let's work through the main pieces, starting with the European Union framework. The first thing to understand is that insurers are financial firms, so they're caught by the same European Union sustainable finance regime as banks and asset managers, much of which you met back in Part 5. Three pieces matter most. First, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, and its standards, the ESRS, require detailed sustainability reporting on a double materiality basis. Second, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, SFDR, treats insurers, when they sell investment-based products, as financial market participants who must disclose on their products and on their principal adverse impacts. And third, the EU Taxonomy defines what counts as a genuinely green activity. And notably, it includes a dedicated activity for non-life climate adaptation underwriting. In other words, the act of insuring people against climate hazards can itself qualify as a sustainable activity. So the same reporting, disclosure, and classification rules that reshaped banking now apply squarely to insurers. Let me highlight that taxonomy point because it's genuinely distinctive. For most activities, the taxonomy asks whether something is green in the environmental sense. Does this power plant emit little carbon? But climate adaptation underwriting is different. The green contribution is the act of insurance itself. By providing cover that helps households and businesses withstand floods, storms, and heat waves, a non-life insurer is judged to be substantially contributing to climate adaptation. It's a recognition, written into European law, that resilience, helping society absorb the climate impacts that are now unavoidable, is itself a sustainable activity, not just emissions reduction. That's a meaningful conceptual step, and insurers are, for once, on the favorable side of it. Alongside that disclosure regime sits the insurer's own prudential framework, Solvency II. Solvency II is the European Union's rulebook for insurer safety. It governs how much capital they must hold, how they must be governed, and what they must disclose. It's the insurance equivalent of the Basel rules for banks. And its 2024 review pulls sustainability directly into the framework. Two elements stand out. First, insurers must now incorporate climate scenario analysis into their own risk and solvency assessment. The ORSA, which is the forward-looking self-assessment every insurer runs on its own risks. Second, sustainability risks are written into the prudent person principle that governs how insurers invest and into their governance requirements. And looking ahead, the European Supervisor, EIOPA, is actively studying whether climate-related exposures should carry a dedicated prudential treatment, potentially higher capital charges for assets or activities that are especially exposed to climate risk. That last idea is worth dwelling on, because it's where the real teeth could be. Disclosure rules ask insurers to describe their climate risk. A prudential capital charge would make them pay for it, in hard capital. If, say, a bond issued by a high-carbon company had to be backed by more capital than a green one, that would directly raise the cost of holding brown assets and tilt insurers' vast investment portfolios toward the transition. The debate, the same one raging in banking over a green supporting factor or a brown penalizing factor, is whether capital rules should be used as a climate policy tool at all, or whether they must stay strictly about financial safety. EIOPA studies are feeling out exactly where that line should sit. That brings us to the supervisors themselves, at two levels. At the European level, there's EIOPA, the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority. EIOPA runs climate stress tests, issues guidance on how insurers should build climate scenarios into the ORSA, and, very usefully, it publishes a natural catastrophe protection gap dashboard that tracks how much climate risk is going uninsured across Europe. Remember the protection gap from Part C? Regulators are now measuring it systematically. At the global level, there's the IAIS, the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, which sets standards worldwide. The IAIS has issued supervisory guidance on climate-related risks in the insurance sector, helping to align how regulators everywhere treat these exposures. So supervision is hardening from Europe outward to the whole world. Let me say a word about what a climate stress test actually involves, because it's the supervisor's key tool. The regulator defines a scenario, say a sudden disorderly transition where carbon prices spike, or a world of intensifying physical hazards decades out, and then asks every insurer, under this scenario, what happens to your claims, to your investments, and to your capital? Would you still be solvent? These exercises force insurers to confront risks that don't show up in last year's data, and they give supervisors a comparable, system-wide picture of where the vulnerabilities lie. They are not yet used to set hard capital requirements, but they are how regulators are learning where the pressure points are. And they are becoming more demanding with each round. Now to the voluntary, industry-led side. The United Nations Principles for Sustainable Insurance, the PSI, were launched in 2012 at the Rio Plus 20 Summit by the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative. Think of them as the insurance equivalent of the Principles for Responsible Investment and the Principles for Responsible Banking that you've met earlier in the course. There are 4 principles, and they're intuitive. Embed ESG into your decision-making. Work with your clients and business partners on it. Work with governments and other stakeholders, and report on your progress. The reach is substantial. More than 220 organizations have signed, representing around 1/3 of world insurance premium and roughly $15 trillion of assets. They are voluntary and aspirational, but they represent the largest collaboration between the United Nations and the insurance industry. Now, voluntary and aspirational is doing a lot of work in that sentence, so let me be honest about the limitation. Because there's no enforcement, critics fairly ask whether principles like these change behavior or mainly provide good publicity. The charge of greenwashing. A signature on a set of principles is cheap, genuinely repricing risk or turning away profitable fossil fuel business is not. The fair assessment is probably this. Frameworks like the Principles for Sustainable Insurance matter as a way to build shared standards, common language, and peer pressure across the industry. But they are no substitute for the hard, mandatory regulation we discussed a moment ago. And the next slide shows, dramatically, just how fragile the purely voluntary approach can be. But voluntary alliances can be fragile. And here's a cautionary tale. The Net Zero Insurance Alliance, the NZIA, was launched in 2021, again under the United Nations Environment Programme, with members pledging to transition their underwriting portfolios to net zero. It attracted the biggest names in the industry. Then, from 2023, it fell apart. After a letter from 23 United States State Attorneys General alleging that coordinating on climate might breach antitrust law, members headed for the exits: Munich Re, Zurich, Allianz, AXA, Escor, Lloyds, and more. The alliance was formally disbanded on the 25th of April 2024 and replaced by a looser, less binding Forum for Insurance Transition to Net Zero. The lesson is exactly the same one the banks learned with their Net Zero Banking Alliance, the NZBA. Voluntary climate coalitions are vulnerable to political and legal pressure. When the going gets tough, members can simply walk away, which is a strong argument for embedding sustainability in binding regulation rather than relying on pledges alone. There's a deeper lesson here about the politicization of ESG, especially in the United States. What the attorneys general argued was that insurers coordinating to cut emissions could amount to an illegal cartel, using antitrust law, of all things, as a weapon against climate cooperation. Whether or not you find that argument convincing, its effect was immediate. Faced with legal risk at home, global insurers abandoned a climate alliance almost overnight. This has produced a phenomenon now called green hushing, where firms quietly continue their climate work but stop talking about it publicly to avoid becoming a target. It's a striking reversal from just a few years ago, when announcing net zero pledges was seen as pure reputational upside. The ground under voluntary climate action has genuinely shifted, and this episode is the clearest example. Let me close Part E with a wide-angle view. It's tempting to think of sustainability regulation as a job for the reporting department. It isn't. As this slide shows, the European Union's sustainability rules now touch every single business area of an insurer. Product development has to factor in sustainability. Pricing and underwriting must reflect climate risk. Claims and loss management, asset management, the IT systems and organization, human resources and leadership, sales and customer service, and of course reporting and governance. Every one of them is affected. The point is that sustainability has stopped being a niche or a side office function. For a modern insurer, it's woven through the entire operating model. Let's recap the regulatory landscape. Insurers are caught by the same European Union regime as other financial firms, CSRD, SFDR, and the Taxonomy, and their own prudential framework, Solvency II, now embeds climate risk through the ORSA and beyond. Supervisors EIOPA and the IAIS are running stress tests and issuing guidance, and even tracking the protection gap directly. On the voluntary side, the United Nations Principles for Sustainable Insurance guide the industry, while the collapse of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance shows how fragile voluntary pledges can be. And regulation now reaches into every corner of the business. In our final video for Part 7, we look at the sustainable products insurers actually offer, the empirical evidence and real-world cases, and then we'll draw the whole chapter together. See you there.